Hello and welcome to Premium Times interview. My name is Chemakal Kafor, and today in the studio we have Richard Gingras, who is the Vice President Google News at Google. I beg your pardon. I was going to say Google News, but then it's really News at Google. He's here in Nigeria for the first time?
Yes.
For the first time, he's visited Nigeria, and he attended the first West African Journalism Innovation Conference. Innovation is the word I want you to pay attention to all through this conversation we'll be having with Richard. But first, let's welcome Richard. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today. This is your first time in Nigeria. In Africa? No.
No, in Nigeria.
West Africa?
I think so.
Interesting. And what has been your experience so far? What do you think?
It has been a very impressive experience. In fact, an inspiring experience, and I'll tell you why. As you know, we have around the world there are challenges in governments and countries, political divisiveness, and so on. What I found really inspiring here was not only the extraordinary amount of very thoughtful people pursuing quality journalism, right, at the West African Innovation Journalism Conference, young, old, men, women, but also the discussion about the importance of journalism's role and the importance of maintaining democracies. And I say that because I don't hear that enough around the world. And I suspect I know why here. You know, you have a young 24-year-old democracy, and you understand its fragility, and you focus on that. I come from a country that's had a democracy for 250 years, but right now it's an extraordinarily fragile democracy, and I don't feel that people in my country are even fully aware that that's the case. I think we've taken it for granted. And so I find that really inspirational. I find it inspirational that the journalists here are recognizing the challenge of how to create quality journalism that is relevant and valued and reaches people in all the ways we need to reach them in this digital world of ours.
Thank you. So that leads us straight into the conversation about the nexus, journalism, democracy, innovation, and journalism sustainability, which I think is the crux of the conversation for the conference. It is, like you said, taken for granted oftentimes, and I dare say even here in Nigeria, the importance journalism plays in a democracy. Interestingly, in Nigeria, it is constitutional, the role we play as journalists to hold government to account, but then no one talks about how to make sure that journalism is sustained to continue to hold government to account in a way that is not compromised, in a way that is independent. So the question now is, with the work you do at News at Google, and I see that you support a lot of media houses, a lot of journalism around the world, what is the biggest question you've had to confront? Journalism and innovation.
I think the biggest question and the biggest challenge, frankly, is innovation and how to enable that innovation. You know, the philosophy that I've tried to take at Google is to your point, for journalism to be accountable, it needs to be independently sustainable, right? Full stop.
Yeah.
You don't want to be reliant on government funding. You don't want to be reliant on any singular source of funding. You need to be independent. But to be independent, and particularly in today's digital world, means to be innovative, to reach people in the different ways they need to be reached, right? Journalism is taking very different forms. Is also, are we doing the right thing to understand how our societies, whether yours or mine, understand journalism? Are they finding it relevant? Are they finding it valued? If they don't find it valued, then they're not going to contribute or subscribe to the offerings that you present to them. So that's really critical. Now, different governments around the world are going to address these things differently. Some governments may provide government support. In some cases, governments are suggesting that tech companies provide support. we're happy to provide support, but again, I feel we wouldn't be doing it in the right way if we didn't recognize the importance of enabling independence. And so, I've written about this a lot in saying that, press freedom is so important, and it's going to be up to individual governments to decide how best to enable it. And those are key questions. Not that we can decide, but that you and your society can decide. As I say, what flavor of press freedom do you want in your society? And how do you do it in such a fashion that it maintains that critical degree of independence such that you can actually be effective in holding institutions to account?
So I like how you framed that question. What flavor of press freedom do you want in your society? And then it leads me back to the conversation around how journalism is functioning in the digital age, which is where we are now, and how responsibility is pushed to different tables on how to make media sustainable. And the question I ask each time is, if we ask tech companies to fund journalism, or if we ask government to fund journalism, or even philanthropists to fund journalism, where then do we draw the line for independence? Where then do we say, hands off and let us do this work without your interference? Because like the very cliche thing, he who pays the piper detects the tune. And so how then is tech, because that's where you work, and like you said, you've done this for 50 years, how have you in the last 50 years of your job made sure that interference is little or non-existent?
Again, it is so much, first of all, in the principles and the wisdom of those who lead those news organizations to resist interference. But I do think it is also intrinsic to the sources of financial support. As I said, dangerous to be over-reliant on any singular source. Let's not kid ourselves. I worked in public broadcasting in the United States. That was a very political issue in the United States, such that public broadcasting in the United States is not really seen as a rich source of journalistic content. Because early on, there were challenges with an administration and who threatened to take away the funding if we didn't do the right thing.
Exactly.
So one has to be careful about that. I go beyond that and say, well, if a country says, we think journalism should be funded by third parties in some fashion, even there I say, come up with a structure that tries to ensure as much independence as possible, right? I don't like to see Google in the middle of deciding who gets funding. That's not our job, right? And it will, at the very least, by perception, it'll create a perception of undue influence. So, throughout my career at Google, my objective first has been, how do we enable independent success, not provide financial support? Now, but if a country says, thou shalt provide financial support, then let's figure out what the most thoughtful, smart way to approach it such that independence is maintained.
Interesting. So, again, digital era, innovation, a market, getting people to subscribe to the different offerings, like you rightly said, that media outlets or newsrooms are providing. For instance, in Nigeria, a lot of people will not pay for news.
Yeah.
And I would like to attribute it to the plurality of the media. Everyone has a publishing press, you said that, in their hands. And so people decide what they want to consume and where they want to go and consume it. So speaking to innovation, which enables sustainability, how then would you think or advise, as someone who has worked within these policies for a long time, that's why I'm asking you this question, how would media houses, and also my media house, Premium Times, is also facing that challenge, like that what we're saying, the media is facing an existential crisis. So advertising revenues are down, and they've been going down, so it just keeps declining. So how then do we confront the reality of the time? Everyone is a publisher, and then you also want to invite them to patronize whatever it is you're selling. How do we do that?
I think there are there are many ways that one can approach it, and there are many answers. There's not a singular answer. I do think it starts first with make sure, as the Premium Times, do you understand the audience that you're trying to serve? How do they perceive you? What do they value? What does that say about how you evolve what you do? Not simply just to give them what they want, but to give them something that they find relevant and valued. So it'll depend on the outlet. One thing I point out to people is, I think when it comes to local journalism in communities, I think there's actually continues to be a good opportunity there to both build relevance and indeed build more opportunities for revenue. And it means, and there's nothing new here, but it means thinking about news in a broader way, right? I mean, one can think of news as this critically important but narrow scope of accountability journalism, investigative reporting, right? Making sure the government is being held to account, making sure institutions are being held to account. That's critically important. There's only a modest percentage of the society that's going to be interested in that.
Sure.
But there are other areas of content that are also news that aren't that are what I call soft news or service journalism. But it's about sports, and it's about entertainment, and it's about culture, and it's about fashion. That's relevant to people. They value that. You know, is local sports being covered? Because I think in that realm, you have the opportunity to reach a larger audience, an audience with content that they perceive as valuable to them, that also has often a contributing factor of giving, say, the brand, say the Premium Times, a greater sense of trust and credibility. You got the sports score right, maybe your reporting on the government is right also, right? So the solutions, I think, are many and varied, and I think it's important to explore those. It's not going to be the same answer for every publication.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think local community news, very different opportunity than being a national brand.
So to wrap this up is the question of AI, artificial intelligence. Where do we find journalism? So a lot of people say, oh, AI is pushing journalists out of work, and in no time, journalists will have nothing to do anymore because the likes of ChatGPT will do the storytelling. And I argue that, oh, AI would never be able to write a story like a human being would do, so you won't find that human touch in it, however they choose to write it. But the question for me is, how does journalism utilize AI to its own advantage in terms of innovation?
Right, and I think there is extraordinary opportunity with AI. And I don't look at it as replacing reporters, particularly reporters doing that kind of hard investigative journalism, right? Understanding the nuance of the story, asking the right questions to the right people to be able to report on that story. That's not going to be done by a machine. However, can AI assist that reporter in that work, right? One of the tools that we offer is a set of tools for investigative journalists called Pinpoint. It doesn't write stories, but it analyzes massive arrays of documents, right? You obtain from the government 20,000 documents on, say, police reports or whatever. How do you analyze those? Well, this tool can analyze them for you, help make sense of it such that you can find the stories. That's an application of AI. Can it be used to copy edit a piece to make sure it's adhering to the style of the publication? Certainly. There are efficiencies there. I do think it can draft articles in areas, and this is where I think there's opportunity. As I mentioned, community news, soccer games, right? The truth is, you could have an AI system that understood the style of the publication and feed it just the statistics from the game. And have it write a narrative story about that game, right? that would be interesting to the audience, valuable to the audience. It's a story that is not likely to be controversial. I mean, you would still want to review the story and edit it before you approved it and published it. But can it help in those areas of content that aren't, in a sense, the sexy areas of content that reporters, or the important areas of content that you want your reporters to be working on? So the phrase I use is, can you use it to extend the coverage that a news organization provides beyond the resources you have today? And can you use that technology to give reporters the superpowers they need in today's world, particularly in today's world of big data, where you want that data out of the government. You want to understand. Look at contracts, military contracts. Well, how do you go through and analyze all those? AI tools can help with that. So I think there's tremendous opportunity there. There's no question that some bad guys, some actors, are going to use AI for bad things. And obviously, we're all going to have to deal with that as well. But let's make sure that journalists are also taking full advantage of the power and capability that these new tools can provide as they evolve.
To wrap this up, would be to ask you, what is your takeaway from the West African Journalism Innovation Conference organized by the Center for Journalism Innovation and Development, and also the Nigerian media landscape?
Well, first of all, my experience at the when Dapo invited me, I think he thought maybe I was just going to participate via Zoom. And I went, no, I want to come because I want to learn. I don't know Nigeria. And I think it's always important for me to get out there and understand how different parts of the world are thinking about things. I did find it extraordinarily inspiring. I met so many young people coming into the profession, young people who recognize the need to innovate, recognize the need to figure out how do we reach generations of young people who don't care about news, right? It was so important hearing people have those conversations. That was just enlightening to me. I can't say I understand the entire media landscape of Nigeria, but I am incredibly impressed by the organizations I've met and by their willingness, in a sense, to ask themselves the hard questions, right? I mean, that's why I say the things I often say. Because I have to tell you, in my experience around the world the last 25 years, I've been kind of disappointed at the traditional news outlets being so slow to recognize the change and so slow to embrace innovation. And I understand that being disrupted is hard. I understand the inclination to try to protect what we've always done. But that's, in my view, nearly suicidal in this world because everything has changed. Not just the business, not just the advertising, human behavior, right? We consume content and news from all kinds of sources. So we might want to be thoughtful about how we understand and embrace that, and embrace the innovation necessary to get there. Not that that's easy, it's obviously not easy, right? Innovation is an easy word to say, not easy to do. It means trying things. It means trying things that don't work. It means learning from the things that you tried and trying again. But in all my experience in my career, and as I've said, in my career I've made more mistakes than you because I've simply had more opportunity in new and different areas to try things that didn't work. But every time you do, you learn something. And if there's anything I learned, and this is something an early mentor told me, he said, Richard, one thing I can tell you is if you try as hard as I know you will try, there is no such thing as failure. Your business might fail, but you won't. Because I think you'll be smart enough to learn from everything you've done, even when what you tried did not work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Gingras. It's been an interesting conversation. I think takeaway for all of us and our viewers would be the importance and how AI is a double-edged sword, but in all of what it is, journalists and the good people of the world need to leverage it to do great things and good journalism. We thank you very much for being here, and we hope that the rest of your stay in Nigeria is blissful, and we hope you get to try a few Nigerian dishes, which I'm sure you've tried during the conference.
I finally tried jollof rice. I will gladly try more things. And by the way, as you said, one of the things I think it's always important to recognize about technology, right? Technology is not something that intrinsically has values. It has value. Like that piece of steel, is it used for a sword? Is it used for a plow?
Yeah.
Right. And so in all of this, it's always, I find it's always incorrect to assume that somehow technology is the savior or that technology is the devil. It's not. It's in what we do with it.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And that was Mr. Richard Gingras, the Vice President News at Google here at Premium Times. Do not forget to follow us on all our social media handles, Premium Times. Thank you and see you again.